Yes, my name's David Cowled. I'm from over in Western Australia, a place called Karalundi. Now, who's heard of Karalundi? Yeah, that's good. Who's been to Karalundi? You've been past it, you haven't dropped in. Oh, shame on you. Who wants to go back to Karalundi? Yes, I know there's a few hands there. Basically, most of my working life has been at Karalundi and helping them to establish Karalundi as a premier Aboriginal boarding school for students all around the state of Western Australia. We would like to get students from other states, but AbStudy doesn't provide funding across borders, unfortunately. Some people have got around that by their carers moving to Perth temporarily and putting Perth down as their address, and so that's how they sort of get around that. But Karalundi is an oasis in the outback. We've got a high and low ropes course there, one of the most extensive within the state probably. We've got a heated swimming pool, nice green lawn. We're only about 4 metres down to unlimited water, so Karalundi is very blessed. Avi Curley, one of the founding members of Karalundi, said that this was the place to put Karalundi many years ago, and it's been operating ever since. It operated as a mission run by the Seventh Adventist Church from 1954 through to 1974, and then it closed down when government policies changed. And then in the early 80s, some of the parents and the students from the old mission days saw the benefit that they had from Karalundi and wanted the same thing for their own children, to get them away from some of the negative effects of their communities and put them into a place where they were going to get a good education and a Christian education at that. But it's now run as an independent, parent-controlled Christian boarding school, and as I said, that was back in 1986, and here we are 2014, and that's what, 26, 27 years still going, although there's a few challenges this last few years where student numbers have been dropping, not just at Karalundi but all around schools around the state. A lot of parents just aren't sending their children to school anymore, and they're wandering around the streets, and a real serious lack of education there. But Karalundi is struggling at the moment, so if you want to move to Perth or wherever and want to send your children to Karalundi, then I'd encourage you to do so that we can keep Karalundi going. Now, the story that I have for you this morning comes from Karalundi, and Karalundi is about 2,600 kilometres away from here, so it is a long, long way. And Miss Kean and I will be travelling back there tomorrow. So we've got a long journey ahead of us. But this story comes from when Karalundi first started up, when I was there, back in 1986. And we had a cook, it might have been 1987 actually, we had a cook there. He was a young fella in his just early 20s, he used to cook for all the students, and his name was Cookie. And we had an old blue truck, a tray on the back of the truck with a bar going up over the cab, and one day Cookie said that he wanted to take some of the boys, or the boys actually asked him, said, "Look, sir, can we go and chase kangaroos with a truck?" And young boys, there was 5 of them, and Cookie, again, a bit young, and probably these days you'd probably call him a hoon or something, I think, but 5 young boys, they were probably about 12 or 13 at the time, and all wanted to go in this little blue truck to chase kangaroos. I think they wanted to catch one so they could cook it up or something, I think. And so it was late afternoon, early evening. Cookie went out the gate with these 5 boys. The 5 boys were all standing up behind the cab on the back of the tray, holding onto the bar, and they went out bush chasing kangaroos. A little while later, a couple of hours later I think it was, a couple of the boys came running back to Karalundi, and they said, Sir, it's been an accident out in the bush. And they'd run about 2 or 3 kilometres all the way back to Karalundi to get help. But what had happened, they'd been out chasing these kangaroos through the bush, doing broadsides through the bush. We knew this because we saw all the tracks when we went out later. So they were driving fairly fast through the bush, trying to avoid all the trees and that, and chasing kangaroos, and they were getting all excited about catching up to these kangaroos, and the boys wanted to jump off and then grab the kangaroo as they drove up beside it. But they all got a bit too enthusiastic, and Cookie the driver got a bit too enthusiastic and turned a bit too sharp, and you can guess what happened? The truck rolled over with these 5 boys that were on the back. 3 of them got thrown off, and the other 2 were pinned underneath the truck. At the time, those 3 boys knew these other boys were underneath the truck. They got onto the back of the truck along with Cookie the driver, who was okay, and they lifted the back of the truck up and dragged the 2 boys out. But these 2 boys weren't moving. They were still, and they thought, man, they're dead. What are we going to do? And so they just ran back with all the might that they could back to Karalundi to get help. And so some of the staff went out to get these boys, and these boys were both unconscious, and it's about 50 kilometres from Karalundi into the nearest town of Meekatharra. And they jumped in their car, took these boys into Meekatharra. One of the boys, one of his legs was about twice the size up on the top part of his leg. They thought he'd broken it, but he was unconscious as well, and the other boy had part of the truck had been resting across his chest, so they thought that he was going to be in a bad way, and he probably wasn't alive. I don't know if they checked his pulse and things like that. I'm sure they did. But they drove very fast into Meekatharra. Normally Meekatharra takes about half an hour to get in there, the 55 kilometres, and I think they did it in about 15 minutes, so they really motored along to get them in there. Anyway, the word came back from the hospital that both boys they were alive, and they were both going to be okay. And they thought that one of the boys certainly had a broken leg, but they did x-rays on his leg, and there was no broken bones. It was just very swollen, very much bruised, and that on the top part of his leg. And the other boy, even though the truck was resting on his chest, he had suffered no broken bones or collapsed lung or anything like that. I think they were in hospital for a couple of days, and they were released. The next day went out to the truck to investigate what had happened. Of course we need to do that, and that's when we saw all these skid marks all through the bush and things like that. And the 3 boys were there, the ones that lifted the truck off these 2 boys, and they went to do the same thing to help get the truck back on its wheels again. And the boys tried as they might, they could not lift that truck. It did not move. And they tried with all their might. They could not move that truck one bit. We had to get another vehicle to pull it back over onto its wheels again. And those boys knew what it was. Who had helped them that day? Who do you think had helped them? Yes, I think their guardian angels were protecting them that day. And those boys knew that God had a plan for them, that He spared their life. And if you had a look at that little blue truck, the bar that went across the top, it was a nice curved straight bar, and where it was been across the boy's leg, it had a little bit of a bend in that bar. So it went across, down, and it was quite a thick bar too, like this, across his leg. But both boys survived to live another day, and we certainly had prayers and thank God for His protection. As whenever we go out the gate at Karalundi, it's nearly a tradition. As soon as we get to the grid at the gate, we always pray for God's protection, and that's something that still goes on today. Anybody that comes in, as soon as they come back from being outside the gate, they pray and thank God for their protection. Whenever they leave, they also ask God to protect them as they travel out. So if ever you go there, you'll see that as a ongoing thing that they always do. But these boys knew that God had a plan for them, and one of those boys, his name is Kelman Patch. They call him KP for short, and he is very much involved with Karalundi to this day, and he's now sending his children to Karalundi. And so if some of you go back to Karalundi, you can ask KP. Some of you might know KP, and ask him about that story. But just remember that God is out there watching over and protecting us, and sometimes things do happen to us, and God uses those things to let us know that He is there to help guide us and protect us. But sometimes we might do some silly things that we might get hurt, and sometimes that's just a warning that we need to be careful about what we do, that sometimes God can't always keep us from harm and danger, but sometimes He lets circumstances happen so as to teach us a lesson sometimes. But thank you for listening, and certainly come over to Karalundi and check the place out. It's one of the greatest places, I think, in Western Australia for Aboriginal education, and proud to be part of that, and encourage you all to come over and check the place out sometime. Send your kids there. Thanks.